82%. That is the percentage of managers in the United States who were never formally trained to lead anyone. 82%. That number comes directly from a Gallup workplace study that surveyed over 2 million managers across 70,000 teams. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Those untrained managers are currently responsible for the performance, motivation, and mental health of 70% of the American workforce. Let that sink in for a moment. If you are listening to this right now, there is a very high chance that you are one of those 82%. You got promoted because you were excellent at your job. You hit your numbers. You solved problems faster than anyone else on the floor. And one day, someone tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Congratulations, you are now in charge of a team." Nobody handed you a playbook. Nobody sat you down and explained how to give feedback that does not destroy someone's confidence. Nobody taught you how to run a meeting that people actually want to attend. And certainly, nobody warned you about the loneliest part of leadership, which is this: the skills that got you promoted are not the skills that will make you successful in your new role. Welcome to what organizational psychologists call the accidental manager trap. And if you feel like you have been stumbling through this role, faking confidence you do not actually feel, I need you to hear something clearly. It is not your fault. But from this moment forward, it is your responsibility. This audiobook exists for one reason. In the next 90 minutes, you are going to learn what most managers spend 5 painful years figuring out through trial and error. You are going to learn the frameworks, the psychology, and the exact Monday morning actions that separate the managers people tolerate from the leaders people would follow into a burning building. And I promise you this, by the time you finish the last chapter, you will not just understand leadership. You will feel it in the way you walk into your next meeting. So let us begin with the question nobody asks out loud, but everyone is thinking. Why is this so hard? Here is the honest answer, and it is one that Harvard Business School professor Linda Hill spent over 2 decades researching. She followed hundreds of new managers during their first year on the job, and her findings, published in a landmark study through Harvard Business Review, revealed something most companies would rather not admit. The number one reason new managers struggle is not a lack of intelligence. It is not a lack of work ethic. It is an identity crisis. Think about that. Before your promotion, you knew exactly who you were. You were the expert, the go-to person, the one who could be counted on to deliver. Your identity was built on personal competence. You felt valuable because of what you could do with your own 2 hands. Then the promotion happened. And overnight, your value was no longer measured by what you produce. It was measured by what your team produces. That is not a job change. That is a psychological earthquake. And here is where most new managers make their first critical mistake. Instead of embracing this new identity, they cling to the old one. They keep doing the work themselves because it feels safe. They micromanage because letting go feels like losing control. They avoid difficult conversations because they do not want to be the bad guy. And slowly, without even realizing it, they become the bottleneck for their own team. Does any of that sound familiar? If it does, you are not alone. You are in the 82%. But you are also in the right place, because recognizing the trap is the first step to escaping it. Now, I want to show you something that will change the way you think about your role starting today. I call it the manager versus leader spectrum, and it comes from a pattern I have seen play out in every industry, every company size, and every level of management. Average managers focus on tasks. They think their job is to make sure the work gets done. They check boxes. They monitor hours. They measure output. And when something goes wrong, they jump in and fix it themselves, because that is faster than teaching someone else to do it. Elite leaders focus on people. They understand that their job is not to do the work. Their job is to build the people who do the work. They invest time in coaching. They create environments where their team members feel safe enough to take risks and smart enough to solve problems without being told how. And when something goes wrong, they do not fix it. They ask a question. They say, "What do you think we should do?" That one question, "What do you think we should do?" is worth more than any management book on the shelf, because it does 2 things simultaneously. It develops your team members' problem-solving ability, and it communicates trust. And trust, as you are about to discover throughout this audiobook, is the single most important currency a leader possesses. Google proved this. In 2012, Google launched an internal research initiative called Project Aristotle. Their goal was simple but ambitious. Figure out what makes some teams wildly successful while others, with equally talented people, consistently underperform. They analyzed 180 teams across the company. They measured everything: team composition, educational backgrounds, personality types, social connections, work habits, and what they found shocked even Google's own data scientists. The number one predictor of team performance was not who was on the team. It was how the team worked together. Specifically, the highest performing teams shared one thing in common: psychological safety. That is the belief held by every member of the team that they will not be punished, humiliated, or marginalized for speaking up, asking questions, or making mistakes. Now here is why that matters to you personally. Right now, today, you are the single greatest influence on whether your team feels psychologically safe. Not the CEO, not HR, not the company culture statement on the wall. Your behavior in the next meeting you run, the next piece of feedback you deliver, the next time someone on your team admits they made an error, that is what determines whether your team operates in a zone of trust or a zone of fear. And the data on this is staggering. Gallup's 2023 State of the Global Workplace report found that managers account for 70% of the variance in team engagement scores. 70%. That means your team's motivation, their willingness to go above and beyond, their decision to stay at the company or quietly update their resume. All of that is driven primarily by one factor: you. That might feel like pressure, but I want you to reframe it. It is not pressure. It is power. It is the power to change people's lives, to accelerate careers, to build something that outlasts any quarterly target. And that power starts with a decision. The decision to stop being an accidental manager and start becoming an intentional leader. Let me give you the first practical tool you can use immediately. I call it the Monday Morning Mirror. Before your first meeting every Monday, I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. Write them on a sticky note if you have to. Question 1. What does my team need from me this week that only I can provide? Not what tasks need to get done. What does your team need from you as a leader? Maybe it is clarity on priorities. Maybe it is a difficult conversation you have been avoiding. Maybe it is simply showing up and listening. Question 2. Where am I currently being a bottleneck? Be honest with yourself. Where are you holding on to work because you do not trust someone else to do it your way? That is the exact spot where you need to delegate, and we will build a complete delegation framework in Chapter 4. Question 3. Who on my team needs to hear something from me this week, and what is it? Maybe someone did excellent work last week, and you forgot to acknowledge it. Maybe someone is struggling, and you have been too busy to notice. This question forces you to think about your people as individuals, not as headcount. 3 questions, 60 seconds, every Monday morning. That is where intentional leadership begins. Now, I realize we have covered a lot of ground in this first chapter, and I want to be transparent about what is coming next. Because everything you have heard so far, the accidental manager trap, the identity crisis, the importance of psychological safety, all of that is the foundation. It is the why. But the why without the how is just a motivational speech. And motivational speeches do not build great teams. Systems do. So in the next chapter, we are going to go deeper into the most important mindset shift you will ever make as a leader. It is the shift from thinking like a boss to thinking like a leader. And I have to warn you, what you are about to hear is going to challenge some deeply held beliefs about what it means to be in charge. Beliefs that feel true, but are actually the reason most managers burn out within 2 years. The average manager hears this and thinks, I already know the difference between a boss and a leader. The elite leader hears this and thinks, I wonder what I am still getting wrong. I hope you are the second one, because what is waiting for you in Chapter 2 is the single most important idea in this entire audiobook. Let us keep going. Chapter 2, The Leadership Mindset Shift. Here is a paradox that will bother you for the rest of the day. The best leaders in the world do less work than you do. Not less important work. Less work, period. They leave the office earlier. They check fewer emails. They attend fewer meetings. And yet their teams consistently outperform yours by every measurable metric. Revenue, innovation, employee retention, customer satisfaction, all of it. How is that possible? How can someone who appears to be doing less actually accomplish more? The answer is the most important idea in this entire audiobook, and it comes down to a single mindset shift that separates the 82% of untrained managers from the elite 18% who build teams people beg to join. That shift is this. Average managers believe their job is to have the answers. Elite leaders believe their job is to ask the right questions. Read that again in your mind. Average managers believe their job is to have the answers. Elite leaders believe their job is to ask the right questions. That distinction sounds simple. It is not, because everything in your career up to this point has rewarded you for having answers. You got promoted because you were the person in the room who knew the most, solved problems the fastest, and delivered results with your own hands. Your entire professional identity is built on competence, on knowing. And now I am telling you that the very thing that made you successful is the thing that will make you fail as a leader. That is the paradox. And until you resolve it, you will be trapped in a cycle of overwork, micromanagement, and quiet resentment from a team that feels suffocated by your need to control everything. Let me show you exactly what this looks like in practice, because I guarantee you have lived this scenario at least once in the past month. It is Tuesday morning. One of your team members comes to you with a problem. Maybe a client is unhappy. Maybe a deadline is at risk. Maybe a process is broken. And in that moment, your brain does what it has been trained to do for your entire career. It solves the problem. Instantly. You can see the answer. It is right there. And so you say, here is what you should do. You lay out the solution. The team member nods, walks away, and executes your instructions. Problem solved. Right? Wrong. You just made 3 catastrophic mistakes in under 60 seconds. First, you taught your team member that their job is not to think. Their job is to bring problems to you and wait for instructions. You just created a dependency. Second, you robbed that person of a growth opportunity. They came to you with a challenge that could have stretched their capabilities, and you stole that chance by handing them the answer on a plate. Third, and this is the one that will hurt the most, you just added another item to your own plate. Because next time a similar problem comes up, where do you think that team member is going to go? Right back to you. You did not solve a problem. You created a recurring one. This pattern has a name. Researchers at the Center for Creative Leadership in Greensboro, North Carolina, studied over 20,000 managers across 4 continents and found that 67% of new leaders fall into what they call the expert trap. That is the compulsive need to demonstrate your technical expertise even after your role has shifted from individual contributor to people leader. And the data on its consequences is brutal. Managers who remain stuck in the expert trap experience 43% higher burnout rates, and their teams show 31% lower engagement scores compared to managers who successfully make the identity shift. 43% higher burnout, 31% lower engagement. That is not a minor difference. That is the difference between a team that thrives and a team that quietly falls apart. So how do you escape? How do you rewire a brain that has spent years, maybe decades, building an identity around being the smartest person in the room? You start with a concept that Marshall Goldsmith, one of the world's top executive coaches and a Thinkers 50 Hall of Fame inductee, made famous in his best-selling work. He said what got you here will not get you there. And he was not being philosophical. He was being precise. The behaviors that drive success at one level of an organization actively undermine success at the next level. Every single time. Let me make this concrete with what I call the boss versus leader translation table. These are not abstract ideas. These are real behaviors you exhibit every single day, and each one either builds your team up or slowly tears it down. A boss says, I need this done by Friday. A leader says, the deadline is Friday, and I want to understand how you are planning to approach this. What support do you need from me? A boss says, let me show you how to do this. A leader says, what have you tried so far and what happened? A boss walks into a meeting with an agenda and a predetermined conclusion. A leader walks into a meeting with an agenda and genuine curiosity about what the team sees that they might not. A boss hears about a mistake and asks, what went wrong? A leader hears about a mistake and asks, what did we learn? And what will we do differently next time? A boss measures success by output. Tasks completed, emails sent, hours logged. A leader measures success by outcomes. Did the team grow? Did we solve the right problem? Are we better positioned for next quarter than we were last quarter? Every one of those translations represents a choice. And here is what makes it difficult. The boss behavior feels productive. It feels efficient. It feels like leadership. But it is not. It is management at best, and it is control at worst. And people do not give their best work to someone who controls them. They give their best work to someone who trusts them. Now, I want to give you a practical framework you can start using today to make this mindset shift real. I did not invent it. It comes from a model developed by situational leadership theorists Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard, and it has been validated by over 40 years of organizational research. But I have simplified it into something you can actually remember and use without pulling out a textbook. I call it the 4 levels of leadership response. Every time a team member comes to you with a problem or a question, you have 4 options. And the option you choose should depend on that person's current skill level and confidence, not on your personal preference or your mood that day. Level 1 is direct. This is for brand new team members or situations involving genuine crisis. You give clear instructions. You tell them what to do, how to do it, and when it needs to be done. This is appropriate roughly 10% of the time. Level 2 is coach. This is for team members who have some skill but lack confidence. You guide them through the thinking process. You ask questions, but you also share your perspective. You think together. This is appropriate roughly 30% of the time. Level 3 is support. This is for capable team members who know what to do but need encouragement or a sounding board. You listen more than you talk. You validate their thinking. You say, "That sounds like a strong approach, go for it." This is appropriate roughly 40% of the time. Level 4 is delegate. This is for your strongest team members on tasks they have demonstrated they can handle. You define the outcome, hand over full ownership, and get out of the way. You say, "I trust you. Keep me posted on progress, and let me know if you hit a wall." This is appropriate roughly 20% of the time. Here is the critical insight. Most accidental managers operate at level 1 almost all the time. They direct, they instruct, they tell, and they do this regardless of who they are talking to or what the situation requires. That is not leadership. That is a one-size-fits-all approach, and it suffocates experienced team members while simultaneously overwhelming the manager. The elite leader reads the room. They assess the person in front of them, consider the complexity of the task, and choose the appropriate level. And over time, their goal is always the same. Move every team member from level 1 toward level 4. Because a team full of level 4 performers is a team that runs itself. And a leader with a self-running team is a leader who has time to think strategically, develop new opportunities, and actually enjoy the work instead of drowning in it. This week, I want you to try something. For every interaction you have with a team member, before you respond, pause for 3 seconds and ask yourself one question. What level does this person need from me right now? Just that. 3 seconds. One question. You will be stunned by how often your default is level 1 when the person in front of you is ready for level 3 or 4. That pause, that 3-second pause, is the mindset shift in action. It is the moment where you stop being a boss and start being a leader. Now, here is what I need you to understand before we move forward. Everything you have learned in these first 2 chapters, the accidental manager trap, the expert trap, the 4 levels of leadership response, all of it rests on a single foundation. And that foundation is trust. Specifically, a very particular kind of trust that most managers have never even heard of. It is called psychological safety. And Google spent 4 years and millions of dollars proving that it is the single most important factor in team performance. More important than talent, more important than resources, more important than strategy. In Chapter 3, I am going to show you exactly what psychological safety is, exactly how Google discovered it, and exactly how you build it on your team starting this week. And I have to be honest with you. What you are about to learn is going to make you uncomfortable, because building psychological safety requires you to do something that most managers find terrifying. It requires you to be vulnerable. If that word just made you flinch, good. That means you need the next chapter more than you think. Let us keep going. Chapter 3, Psychological Safety, the Google Secret. Google spent 4 years and millions of dollars trying to answer one question. What makes some teams brilliant and others mediocre? They called it Project Aristotle, named after the philosopher's famous quote that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And the answer they found broke every assumption their own executives held about what makes a great team. It was not talent. It was not experience. It was not even intelligence. The number one predictor of whether a team would succeed or fail at Google, across every department, every function, every level, was something most managers have never been formally taught: psychological safety. If you have never heard that term before, you are about to hear something that changes the way you lead forever. And if you think you already understand it, I am willing to bet that what you think it means and what it actually means are two very different things. Because psychological safety is not about being nice. It is not about avoiding conflict. And it is absolutely not about lowering your standards. In fact, the research shows the exact opposite. Teams with the highest psychological safety also have the highest performance standards. They are not soft. They are fierce. But they are fierce in a way that makes people want to rise to the occasion rather than hide from it. So what is psychological safety precisely? The term was coined by Dr. Amy Edmondson, a professor of leadership and management at Harvard Business School, who has spent over 25 years studying this single concept. Her definition is elegant. Psychological safety is a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Interpersonal risk-taking. That is the key phrase. It means your team members believe they can raise their hand and say, "I do not understand this." It means they can say, "I made a mistake, and here is what happened." It means they can challenge your idea in a meeting without fearing that you will punish them for it later, either openly or through some subtle shift in how you treat them. And here is why this matters so much to your bottom line. When people feel psychologically unsafe, they do not stop working. They stop thinking. They stop contributing ideas. They stop flagging risks before those risks become disasters. They nod along in meetings and then complain in the parking lot. They give you exactly what you asked for, nothing more, because doing more means taking a risk, and taking a risk means potential punishment. McKinsey's Organizational Health Survey, which has analyzed over 5 million employee responses across more than 2,000 companies, found that teams operating in low-safety environments are 47% less likely to innovate and 73% less likely to catch operational errors before they escalate. Those are not marginal numbers. That is the difference between a team that adapts and a team that crashes. Now let me ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly in your own mind. When was the last time someone on your team openly disagreed with you in a meeting? If you cannot remember, that is not a sign that you are always right. It is a sign that your team does not feel safe enough to tell you when you are wrong. Average managers interpret silence as agreement. Elite leaders interpret silence as a warning sign, because silence in a meeting almost never means everyone agrees. It means someone is afraid to speak. So how do you actually build psychological safety? This is where most leadership books fail you. They tell you it is important, and then they leave you with vague advice like be more open or create a safe space. That is useless. You need a system. I am going to give you one. It is built on 3 pillars, and each pillar has specific, observable behaviors you can start practicing this week. Pillar 1 is frame the work. This means explicitly setting expectations about uncertainty and failure before a project even begins. Most managers launch a project by saying, "Here are the deliverables. Here are the deadlines, go." Elite leaders add one critical sentence. They say something like, "This project involves real uncertainty, and we are going to encounter problems none of us can predict right now. I need everyone's eyes and brains on this. If you see something that concerns you, I need to hear about it immediately, even if it turns out to be nothing." That sounds simple. It is not, because what you are doing with that statement is preemptively lowering the cost of speaking up. You are telling your team that raising a concern is not a sign of weakness or negativity. It is an expected part of the job. Dr. Edmondson's research at Harvard found that leaders who frame work this way before project kickoff see a 26% increase in team members voluntarily reporting problems early, before those problems become expensive. 26% more early warnings. Think about the last project that went sideways on your team. How many of those problems did someone see coming but did not mention? Framing the work would have caught them. Pillar 2 is invite participation actively. This does not mean going around a room and saying, "Does anyone have anything to add?" That question is almost worthless because it puts the burden on the individual to volunteer, and most people will not volunteer in a group setting if they feel even a slight risk of judgment. Instead, you need to create structured moments where participation is the default, not the exception. Here is a technique I call the 2x2. Before making any significant decision in a meeting, pause the discussion. Say, "I want everyone to take 2 minutes and write down 2 concerns or 2 questions you have about this direction. Then we will go around the table and each person shares one." Why does this work? Because writing first eliminates the conformity pressure that kills honest input in group discussions. A 2019 study from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania found that teams who write before they discuss generate 40% more unique ideas and are 3 times more likely to surface dissenting opinions compared to teams who just talk. 40% more ideas, 3 times more dissent, from a 2-minute exercise that costs you nothing. And here is a critical detail. When someone does share a concern or a dissenting view, your response in that moment is everything. If you dismiss it, even subtly, even with a well-meaning phrase like, "That is a good point, but I think we should stay the course," you have just taught the entire room that speaking up is performative. It does not actually change anything. Instead, respond with curiosity. Say, "Tell me more about that." Say, "That is an angle I had not considered. Can you walk us through your thinking?" Say, "I want to make sure I fully understand your concern before we move forward." Those responses signal that dissent is not just tolerated, it is valued. Pillar 3 is respond productively to failure. This is the hardest pillar, and it is the one that separates good managers from truly great leaders. Because this pillar is not about what you say, it is about what you do when something actually goes wrong. Here's the test. One of your team members makes a significant mistake. A client is unhappy. A deadline is missed. A deliverable is subpar. You are frustrated. Maybe you are even embarrassed because the mistake reflects on you and your leadership. What do you do in the next 60 seconds? The average manager does one of 2 things. They either explode, which teaches the team to hide mistakes, or they say nothing and quietly fix it themselves, which teaches the team that mistakes are shameful and should be invisible. The elite leader does something radically different. They say, "Thank you for telling me." Then they ask, "What happened, and what do we need to do to fix it?" And then, critically, they ask, "What can we learn from this? And what should we change in our process to prevent it from happening again?" Thank you for telling me. 5 words. And those 5 words might be the most powerful leadership sentence in the English language, because they reframe failure from a verdict into data. They communicate that the act of reporting a problem is valued, not punished. And they create an environment where your team will bring you bad news early, when it is still cheap to fix, instead of late, when it has already become a crisis. Dr. Edmondson's 25 years of research across hospitals, technology companies, and manufacturing plants consistently shows the same pattern. Teams with leaders who respond productively to failure have error reporting rates that are 300% higher than teams with punitive leaders. Not because they make more mistakes, because they catch more mistakes. The errors exist on every team. The only question is whether you find out about them in time to do something. Now, I want to connect all 3 pillars into something you can use immediately. This week, I want you to do 3 things. First, at the start of your next project or initiative, frame the work. Say out loud that this work involves uncertainty and that you need everyone's input to navigate it. Second, in your next team meeting, use the 2x2 technique before making a decision. Give people 2 minutes to write, then go around the table. Third, the next time someone brings you a mistake, lead with "Thank you for telling me" before you do anything else. 3 actions, 1 week, and I promise you, by Friday, you will notice a shift. Maybe it is small at first. Maybe one person speaks up who has never spoken up before. Maybe someone brings you a problem earlier than they would have last month. That is the beginning of psychological safety. And once it starts, it compounds. But here is the honest truth. Psychological safety gives your team the confidence to speak up and take risks. That is essential, but it does not solve one of the biggest problems new leaders face, which is this: you are still doing too much of the work yourself. You know it. You feel it every evening when you are answering emails at 9 o'clock while your team has gone home. You feel it every time you say, "I will just handle this one, it will be faster." You feel it in the low-grade exhaustion that never fully goes away, no matter how many weekends you work. That is a delegation problem. And in the next chapter, I am going to dismantle every excuse you have ever used to avoid delegating. And I am going to give you a framework so clear and so simple that you will never again fall into the trap of doing your team's work for them. Because the truth is, the reason you do not delegate has nothing to do with your team's competence. It has everything to do with your fear. And we are about to face that fear head on. Chapter 4, The Art of Delegation. Right now, somewhere in your calendar, there is a task you should not be doing. You know exactly which one it is. Maybe it is that weekly report you have been compiling yourself for the past 6 months. Maybe it is that client call you keep taking because you think nobody else can handle it. Maybe it is reviewing every single piece of work before it leaves your team because you cannot stomach the idea of something going out that is less than perfect. You already know you should let it go. You have told yourself a dozen times. And yet, every week, there it is again, sitting on your to-do list, eating your time. And here is the part that makes this a crisis, not just an inconvenience. Every hour you spend doing work your team should be doing is an hour you are not spending on the work that only you can do. Strategic thinking, developing your people, building relationships with stakeholders, removing obstacles that are slowing your team down. The work of a leader. The Harvard Business Review published a study in 2022 that tracked the time allocation of 312 mid-level managers across Fortune 500 companies. The finding was alarming. The average manager spends 41% of their working hours on tasks that could be effectively handled by someone else on their team. 41%. In a 50-hour week, that is more than 20 hours doing work that is not yours. 20 hours a week. That is not a scheduling problem. That is a leadership failure. And if you are honest with yourself, you already knew this. The question is not whether you should delegate. The question is why you are not doing it. Let me name the 3 lies your brain tells you to keep you trapped in the doing instead of the leading. I call them the delegation killers, and every accidental manager falls for at least one of them. Delegation killer number 1. It will be faster if I just do it myself. This is the most seductive lie because it is partially true. Right now, today, yes, it probably would be faster for you to do it. You have done it 100 times. You know the shortcuts. You could do it in your sleep. But here is the math that lie ignores. If a task takes you 1 hour and it would take a team member 3 hours the first time, 2 hours the second time, and 1 hour the third time, you save 1 hour by doing it yourself once. But you lose every future hour forever because that team member never learns and the task never leaves your plate. The elite leader takes the short-term loss for the long-term gain. They invest 3 hours now to save 500 hours over the next 2 years. The average manager saves 1 hour today and wonders 6 months later why they are drowning. Delegation killer number 2. Nobody can do it as well as I can. This lie is driven by perfectionism disguised as quality control. And I need to be direct with you about something. If your standard for delegating is that someone else must do it exactly the way you would do it, you will never delegate anything. Because nobody does things exactly the way you do. That is not a flaw. That is a feature. Different perspectives lead to different approaches, and sometimes those different approaches produce results that are better than yours. A 2021 study from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University examined 340 teams and found that teams with managers who allowed autonomy in execution, meaning they defined the outcome but not the exact method, produced output that was rated 18% higher in quality by independent evaluators compared to teams whose managers dictated both the what and the how. 18% higher quality when you let people figure out their own way. Your way is not the only good way. Let that land. Delegation killer number 3. My team is already too busy. I do not want to burden them. This one sounds noble. It sounds like you are protecting your people. But here is what is actually happening underneath that story. You are making an assumption about your team's capacity without asking them. And worse, you are denying them the opportunity to grow by taking on new challenges. In many cases, the work you are hoarding is exactly the kind of work your top performers are hungry for. They want more responsibility. They want to prove they can handle it. And every time you keep it to yourself, you send an unspoken message that says, I do not think you are ready. That message kills motivation faster than any amount of overwork. So those are the 3 lies. Now let me give you the framework that dismantles them permanently. I call it the delegation matrix, and it works because it removes emotion from the decision entirely. You do not have to wonder whether you should delegate something. The matrix tells you. Here's how it works. Take every recurring task on your plate and evaluate it on 2 dimensions. The first dimension is impact. How much does this task contribute to your team's or organization's strategic goals? High impact or low impact? The second dimension is uniqueness. Does this task require your specific skills, authority, or relationships, or could someone else on your team learn to do it within a reasonable time frame? Unique to you or teachable to others? That gives you 4 categories. Category 1, high impact and unique to you. These are your leadership tasks. Strategic planning, stakeholder negotiations, final hiring decisions, career development conversations with your direct reports. These stay on your plate. This is the work of a leader. Category 2, high impact but teachable. These are your delegation gold mines. These tasks matter to the business, and they are exactly the kind of stretch assignments that develop your team members into future leaders. Client presentations, project planning, cross-functional coordination. You should be actively training your team to take these over, one at a time, using the coaching approach from the 4 levels framework we covered in Chapter 2. Category 3, low impact but unique to you. These are your efficiency traps, tasks that only you can do, but honestly, they do not move the needle much. Certain administrative approvals, routine meetings where you are present out of habit rather than necessity. Your goal with these is to either eliminate them entirely or reduce the time you spend on them by 50%. Category 4, low impact and teachable. These should have left your plate months ago. Routine reports, data entry, basic scheduling, status updates. If you are still doing any of these, delegate them immediately. Not next week, not after you create a training document. This week, hand them off with a brief verbal walkthrough and let your team member figure out the rest. Now, once you have decided what to delegate, there is a specific way to hand it off that sets your team member up for success instead of confusion. I call it the 5-point handoff, and it takes less than 10 minutes per delegation. Point 1, define the outcome, not the process. Tell them what success looks like, not how to get there. Say, I need this client proposal to communicate our 3 key differentiators and be ready for review by Thursday at noon. Do not say, open the template, go to slide 4, change the header, add these bullet points. The first approach develops judgment. The second approach creates a robot. Point 2, clarify the authority level. Your team member needs to know how much decision-making power they have. Are they making the final call? Are they drafting a recommendation for you to approve? Are they handling everything independently unless they hit a specific obstacle? Be explicit about this. Ambiguity about authority is the #1 reason delegated tasks bounce back to the manager's desk. Point 3, identify the resources. What tools, information, or people does this person need access to in order to succeed? Do they need a budget? Do they need an introduction to a stakeholder? Do they need access to a specific database? Anticipate what they will need and provide it up front, because nothing derails delegation faster than a team member getting stuck because they do not have the right access or information. Point 4, set check-in points. Delegation is not abandonment. You are not throwing a task over the wall and hoping for the best. Set 1 or 2 brief check-in points between now and the deadline. A 5-minute conversation at the midpoint is usually enough. This gives you visibility without micromanaging and it gives your team member a safety net without making them feel watched. Point 5. Make failure safe. Say this out loud. If you hit a wall or something is not working, come talk to me. I would rather help you course correct early than find out at the deadline that we have a problem. This connects directly to the psychological safety framework from Chapter 3. Your team member needs to know that asking for help is a sign of maturity, not a sign of failure. 5 points. 10 minutes. And you have just transferred ownership in a way that actually sticks. Here is what I want you to do this week. Take 30 minutes, that is all, and list every recurring task on your plate. Run each one through the delegation matrix. Identify the 3 tasks that fall into Category 2 or Category 4, the ones that should not be on your plate. Then pick one, just one, and hand it off using the 5-point handoff before Friday. 1 task, 1 week. Start there. Because delegation is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And 6 months from now, when you look at your calendar and realize you have 10 hours a week back for strategic work, you will wonder why you waited so long. But here is the thing about delegation. It only works if you can also give your team honest feedback along the way. And honest feedback, the kind that actually changes behavior without destroying relationships, is something most managers are terrible at. They either sugarcoat everything until it is meaningless, or they deliver criticism so bluntly that it damages trust. There is a better way. It is called radical candor, and it is a framework that has transformed how companies like Google, Apple, and Twitter train their managers to have the conversations that matter most. That is exactly what we are unpacking in Chapter 5. And fair warning, you are about to discover that everything you have been taught about giving feedback is probably making things worse. Let us find out. Chapter 5. Radical Candor. Feedback that works. A study published in the Journal of Applied Psychology tracked 914 manager-employee relationships across 47 companies over a 3-year period. They measured one thing: the correlation between how often a manager gave honest, direct feedback and the performance trajectory of their team. The results were not subtle. Teams whose managers delivered candid feedback at least once a week improved their performance metrics by an average of 39% over 12 months. Teams whose managers avoided difficult feedback conversations or only gave it during annual reviews declined by 12% over the same period. 39% up or 12% down. That is a 51 percentage point swing, and the only variable was whether the manager had the courage to say what needed to be said when it needed to be said. And yet, here you are. Right now, there is probably someone on your team whose performance or behavior needs to be addressed, and you have been putting off that conversation for days, maybe weeks, maybe months. You keep telling yourself that you are waiting for the right moment, that it is not that serious, that maybe the problem will correct itself. It will not correct itself. It never does. And every day you wait, the problem gets harder to fix, and the conversation gets more awkward to have. That is not a theory. That is a pattern that plays out in every organization on the planet. And it is the single most common failure mode among otherwise competent managers. So why is feedback so hard? The answer comes from a place that might surprise you. It is not about skill. It is about fear. Specifically, 2 fears that pull you in opposite directions until you are paralyzed. Fear number 1 is the fear of damaging the relationship. You like this person. You work with them every day. You do not want things to get weird. So you soften the message until it is meaningless, or you avoid the conversation entirely. Kim Scott, the former senior leader at Google and Apple who developed the Radical Candor framework, has a name for this. She calls it ruinous empathy. You care about the person so much that you fail to challenge them. And the result is that they never improve, they never grow, and eventually you end up either managing around them or managing them out, which is far more damaging to the relationship than an honest conversation would have been. Fear number 2 is the fear of being too harsh. Some managers overcompensate in the other direction. They deliver feedback so bluntly, so stripped of empathy, that it lands like a punch. Scott calls this obnoxious aggression. The message gets through, but the trust is destroyed. And once trust is gone, the feedback loop shuts down permanently. Your team member will never be vulnerable with you again. They will nod, agree, and start looking for another job. Here is the critical insight. Both of these fears lead to the same outcome, which is a team member who is not growing. The ruinously empathetic manager protects the person's feelings but sacrifices their development. The obnoxiously aggressive manager delivers the truth but sacrifices the relationship. Neither approach works. Radical candor is the balance point. It means caring personally and challenging directly at the same time. Not one or the other. Both. Simultaneously. Let me show you what this sounds like in practice. Because the theory is useless without execution. Imagine one of your team members, let us call her Sarah, just delivered a presentation to a client. The content was solid, but her delivery was scattered. She jumped between topics, lost her place twice, and the client left confused about next steps. You know Sarah is capable of much better. She has done it before. But today was not her best. Here is what ruinous empathy sounds like. You pull Sarah aside and say, "Good job in there. That client can be tough. I think it went fine." Sarah walks away thinking she nailed it. She does not improve. The next presentation is just as scattered. Here is what obnoxious aggression sounds like. You pull Sarah aside and say, "That was a mess. You were all over the place and the client noticed. You need to fix this before the next one." Sarah walks away feeling humiliated. She does improve, technically, but she also stops taking risks. She plays it safe from now on. Her confidence takes a hit that lasts months. Here is what radical candor sounds like. You pull Sarah aside and say, "Sarah, I want to talk about the presentation because I know you can deliver at a higher level than what we saw today. The content was strong, your research was excellent, and the data you pulled together was exactly what that client needed. But the delivery got away from you. You jumped between sections in a way that made it hard for the client to follow the narrative, and we lost them around the midpoint. I think this is a preparation issue, not a skill issue. What if we block 30 minutes before your next client presentation so you can do a dry run and tighten the flow? I think that one change could make a huge difference." Do you hear the difference? The radical candor version does 4 things. It opens with intention. I am telling you this because I believe in your potential. It acknowledges what went well, which is not flattery, it is accuracy. It names the specific problem without generalizing or making it personal. And it offers a forward-looking solution rather than just criticism. That structure is not accidental. It follows a model that organizational psychologists have validated for over 2 decades. It is called the SBI framework, which stands for Situation, Behavior, Impact. And it is the single most effective method for delivering feedback that changes behavior without damaging trust. Here is how SBI works. You describe the specific situation, not a generalization, not a pattern, a single specific moment. Then you describe the observable behavior, not your interpretation, not your assumption about their intention, just what you saw or heard. Then you describe the impact of that behavior. What happened as a result? How did it affect the team, the client, the project, or the person themselves? Let me give you another example to lock this in. Situation, during yesterday's team stand-up. Behavior, you interrupted Marcus twice while he was explaining his progress on the migration project. Impact, Marcus stopped contributing for the rest of the meeting, and 2 other team members who had questions chose not to ask them. That is it. Situation, behavior, impact, no judgment. No character assassination. No, you always do this. Just 3 factual observations that open the door to a productive conversation. And here is the part most managers miss. After you deliver the SBI, you stop talking. You ask, "What is your perspective on this?" And then you listen. Because feedback is not a monologue. It is the first half of a conversation. The person you are talking to may have context you do not have. Maybe Marcus was going down the wrong path and needed to be redirected. Maybe there is a dynamic between those 2 colleagues that you are not aware of. The SBI opens the door. Listening walks through it. Now, everything I have said so far has been about corrective feedback. But I need to make something clear because this is where most managers leave enormous value on the table. Positive feedback is not optional. It is not a nice to have. It is a strategic tool that drives performance. Gallup's research across 1.4 million employees found that team members who receive meaningful positive recognition at least once a week are 400% more likely to be actively engaged at work compared to those who receive recognition once a year during their annual review. 400%. That is not a rounding error. That is a multiplier. But here is the trap. Most positive feedback is worthless because it is vague. Good job. Nice work. Way to go. Those phrases feel good for about 3 seconds and then evaporate. They do not reinforce the specific behavior you want to see repeated, so they have almost zero impact on future performance. Elite leaders use the same SBI framework for positive feedback. Situation: in the client call yesterday. Behavior: you noticed the client's concern about timeline before they even articulated it and proactively offered a phased delivery plan. Impact: the client's body language shifted immediately, and they signed the extension on the spot. That was exceptional strategic awareness. Same structure, but now the team member knows exactly what they did well and why it mattered. That feedback changes behavior because it is precise enough to be repeatable. Here is your Monday morning action. This week, I want you to have 2 feedback conversations using the SBI framework. 1 corrective and 1 positive. For the corrective conversation, pick the issue you have been avoiding the longest. You know which one it is. It has been sitting in the back of your mind for weeks. Use SBI. Care personally, challenge directly. For the positive conversation, catch someone doing something excellent and tell them exactly what it was and exactly why it mattered. 2 conversations. 1 week. That is all it takes to start building a feedback culture that transforms performance. But here is what I want to prepare you for. Giving feedback is one side of the equation. The harder side, the side that most leadership books completely ignore, is managing your own emotional reactions when you are the one receiving pressure. When the client is angry, when your boss is unreasonable, when a team conflict escalates and everyone is looking at you to fix it. That requires something deeper than a framework. It requires emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is not what most people think it is. It is not about being calm all the time. It is not about suppressing your emotions. It is about something far more powerful and far more practical. And that is exactly what Chapter 6 is about. Because the next time you feel your chest tighten and your jaw clench in a meeting, the difference between a good manager and a great leader is what happens in the 6 seconds after that feeling hits. 6 seconds. That is all you have. Let me show you what to do with them. Chapter 6. Emotional intelligence under pressure. Picture this moment. It is 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. You are already behind on 2 deadlines. Your inbox has 47 unread messages. And then your boss sends a Slack message that says, "We need to talk. Can you come to my office in 10 minutes?" Your stomach drops. Your chest tightens. Your mind starts racing through every possible scenario, most of them catastrophic. By the time you stand up from your desk, your heart rate has increased by 20 beats per minute and your ability to think clearly has been cut in half. Now picture a different version of that same moment. Same message, same boss, same Thursday. But this time, when you read those words, something different happens. You notice the physical sensation, the tightening, the slight acceleration of your pulse. And instead of being hijacked by it, you pause. You take 1 breath. You say to yourself, "I'm having a stress response, and that is normal. I do not know what this conversation is about yet, so I am going to walk in curious instead of defensive." And when you sit down across from your boss, you are calm, present, and ready to listen. Same situation, radically different outcome. The only variable is emotional intelligence. And here is what most people get wrong about emotional intelligence. They think it means being calm all the time. Being the person who never gets angry, never gets frustrated, never loses their composure. That is not emotional intelligence. That is emotional suppression, and research from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence shows that chronic emotional suppression actually increases stress hormones by 23% and reduces cognitive performance over time. Pushing your feelings down does not make you a better leader. It makes you a ticking time bomb. Real emotional intelligence, the kind that Dr. Daniel Goleman defined in his groundbreaking research that analyzed over 500 organizations and was published through Harvard Business Review, is not about controlling your emotions. It is about understanding them. It is the ability to recognize what you are feeling, understand why you are feeling it, and choose how you respond, all in real time. Goldman's research found that emotional intelligence accounts for nearly 90% of what distinguishes top-performing leaders from average ones at the senior management level. Not technical skill, not IQ, not experience, 90% emotional intelligence. And the reason is simple. The higher you climb in an organization, the more your job becomes about navigating people, politics, pressure, and ambiguity. Technical problems have technical solutions. People problems require emotional agility. So let me give you a practical framework for developing emotional intelligence that you can use starting today. I break it into 3 stages, and I call it the SRR method. Sense, reflect, respond. Stage 1 is sense. This is the ability to notice your emotional state in real time before it drives your behavior. Most people skip this stage entirely. Something triggers them, and they react before they even realize they have been triggered. The reaction feels automatic, as if it happened to them rather than through them. But here's what neuroscience tells us. There is a gap between a trigger and a response. Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor, the Harvard-trained neuroanatomist who studied the brain's emotional circuitry, found that the physiological lifespan of an emotion in the body is approximately 90 seconds. That means the chemical rush of anger, fear, or anxiety floods your system and then dissipates within 90 seconds if you do not feed it with additional thoughts. 90 seconds. That is your window. If you can sense the emotion during those 90 seconds without reacting to it, the intensity fades naturally and you regain access to your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational decision-making, strategic thinking, and empathy. React during those 90 seconds, and you are operating from your amygdala, the part of your brain designed for survival, not leadership. Here is a practical technique for stage 1. I call it the body check. 3 times a day, at a set time, pause for 10 seconds and scan your body. Where are you holding tension? Is your jaw clenched? Are your shoulders up near your ears? Is your breathing shallow? These physical signals are your early warning system. They tell you what you are feeling before your conscious mind catches up. The more you practice the body check, the faster you will be able to sense your emotional state in real time, in the moments that actually matter, like that walk to your boss's office. Stage 2 is reflect. This is the ability to understand why you are feeling what you are feeling. And this is where most people get stuck, because they confuse the trigger with the cause. The trigger is the event. Your boss sent a vague message. A team member missed a deadline. A colleague took credit for your idea in a meeting. But the trigger is not why you are upset. The cause is the story you are telling yourself about the trigger. Your boss's message triggered anxiety not because of the words on the screen, but because of the narrative your brain constructed in milliseconds. They are going to criticize me. I am going to get fired. I must have done something wrong. Those stories feel like facts. They are not. They are interpretations, and most of the time they are wrong. A landmark study from the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center found that people overestimate the likelihood of negative outcomes by an average of 40%. 40%. Nearly half of what you worry about is a fiction your brain invented to keep you on high alert. The reflect stage is about catching the story. When you feel a strong emotional reaction, ask yourself one question. What story am I telling myself right now? Just naming the narrative out loud, even silently in your own mind, reduces its power dramatically. Neuroscience research from UCLA's Social Cognitive Neuroscience Lab, led by Dr. Matthew Lieberman, demonstrated that the simple act of labeling an emotion, putting a word to what you feel, reduces activity in the amygdala by up to 50%. They call it affect labeling, and it is one of the most efficient emotional regulation techniques ever documented. So the next time your chest tightens before a difficult conversation, say to yourself, I am feeling anxious because I am telling myself a story that this is going to go badly. That one sentence, spoken internally, gives you back control. Stage 3 is respond. This is where emotional intelligence becomes a leadership superpower. Because once you have sensed the emotion and reflected on the story behind it, you are no longer reacting. You are choosing. And a leader who chooses their response is a leader who commands respect. Here is the 6-second rule that I mentioned at the end of the last chapter. When you feel a strong emotional trigger in a professional setting, give yourself 6 seconds before you say or do anything. 6 seconds is enough time to take one deep breath, label the emotion, and ask yourself one question. What response will serve my team in this situation best right now? That question reorients your brain from self-protection to leadership. It shifts you from what do I want to say to what does this moment need from me? And those are two very different things. Let me show you how this plays out in the real world. One of your team members, let us call him David, pushes back on a decision you have made, and he does it publicly in a team meeting. Your immediate emotional reaction is defensiveness, maybe a flash of anger. You feel challenged in front of your team, and your instinct is to reassert authority, to shut it down. The average manager either gets defensive and argues, which escalates the conflict, or gets cold and dismissive, which silences David and teaches the rest of the team that pushing back is dangerous. Either way, psychological safety takes a hit. The emotionally intelligent leader does something different. They sense the defensiveness. They reflect, I am feeling challenged, and my ego wants to protect itself, but David might have a valid point. Then they respond with intention. They say, David, I appreciate you raising that. Tell me more about your concern. What are you seeing that I might be missing? That response does 3 things simultaneously. It validates David for speaking up, which reinforces psychological safety for the entire team. It buys you time to actually process his point instead of reacting to it. And it positions you as a leader who is strong enough to welcome dissent, which is the highest form of leadership confidence. Now, I want to give you one more tool for the real world, because emotional intelligence is not only about managing moments of conflict. It is also about navigating the chronic emotional drain that comes with leadership, the constant decision-making, the emotional labor of caring about your team while also delivering results, the loneliness of being the person everyone looks to but nobody checks on. I call it the pressure valve practice, and it takes 5 minutes at the end of each workday. Before you leave the office or close your laptop, write down 3 things. What drained me today? What energized me today? What do I need to let go of before tomorrow? That is it. 3 sentences, 5 minutes. The purpose is not journaling for the sake of journaling. It is creating a conscious transition between your leadership identity and your personal identity. Because the managers who burn out are not the ones who work the hardest. They are the ones who never mentally leave work. They carry every unresolved conversation, every missed deadline, every difficult team dynamic home with them, and let it contaminate their sleep, their relationships, and their ability to recharge. 5 minutes, 3 sentences, a clean break between today and tomorrow. That is emotional sustainability. Here is your Monday morning action for this week. Practice the body check 3 times a day for 5 days straight. Set an alarm if you have to. Morning, midday, end of day, 10 seconds each. And the next time you feel triggered, whether it is a tense email, a frustrating meeting, or an unexpected piece of bad news, use the 6-second rule before you respond. You will not be perfect at this. Nobody is. But you will start to notice something remarkable. You will notice the gap between the trigger and your response getting wider. And in that gap is where leadership lives. Now, everything we have covered so far, psychological safety, delegation, feedback, emotional intelligence, all of it comes together in one of the most challenging and most avoided responsibilities of leadership. The difficult conversation, the one you have been dreading, the one that involves conflict, disagreement, or stakes that feel uncomfortably high. Most managers would rather do almost anything than sit in that kind of conversation. But elite leaders do not avoid conflict. They have a system for navigating it. A system that turns tension into clarity and disagreement into alignment. That system is the SBI Conflict Resolution Framework, and it is what Chapter 7 is built around. Because the conversation you have been putting off is the exact conversation that will define whether your team trusts you or merely tolerates you. It is time to stop avoiding it. Chapter 7, Conflict Resolution, the SBI Framework. Here is a paradox most managers never resolve. The conversations you avoid the most are the conversations that would help your team the most, not the easy ones. not the status updates and the project check-ins. The hard ones. The ones where two team members are in silent conflict and everyone pretends not to notice. The ones where a high performer's attitude is poisoning the team culture. The ones where you need to say something uncomfortable to someone you genuinely like. A 2023 study from the Center for Creative Leadership surveyed over 4,000 managers across North America and found that the average leader avoids a critical conversation for an average of 23 days after first recognizing the need for it. 23 days. And in that gap, the problem does not sit still. It compounds. Small tensions become entrenched resentments. Minor misunderstandings solidify into permanent narratives about who is right and who is wrong. So why do we avoid these conversations? The answer goes back to the emotional intelligence framework from Chapter 6. Conflict triggers our threat response. Our brain interprets interpersonal tension as danger, and it defaults to one of three survival modes. Fight, which looks like aggression or dominance. Flight, which looks like avoidance or deflection. Or freeze, which looks like pretending the conflict does not exist and hoping it resolves itself. None of those serve you as a leader. What serves you is a system, and the system I am about to give you turns the most dreaded conversation on your calendar into a structured, productive exchange that actually moves things forward. It is the SBI conflict resolution method. You already know SBI from Chapter 5, Situation, Behavior, Impact. For conflict resolution, we add 2 more steps, making it SBI plus intent plus next steps. Here is how it works in a real scenario. 2 of your team members, let us call them Rachel and Tom, are in conflict. Rachel believes Tom is not pulling his weight on a shared project. Tom believes Rachel is micromanaging his portion of the work. Both have been venting to other team members instead of talking to each other, and the tension is affecting the entire group. Step 1, situation. You meet with both of them together. You set the frame by saying, I have noticed tension between you two on the Henderson project over the past 2 weeks, and I want us to address it directly so we can move forward. Step 2, behavior. You describe what you have observed, not what you have heard secondhand. Rachel, I have noticed you have been checking Tom's deliverables before they are due and requesting revisions before the deadline. Tom, I have noticed you have missed 2 of the 3 internal checkpoints we agreed on. Step 3, impact. Here is what I am seeing as a result. The team is picking up on the tension. 2 other people have come to me separately about it. And the project timeline is now at risk because energy is going into this dynamic instead of the work. Step 4, intent. This is the new element. You ask each person to share their intent, not their position. Rachel, what is driving your approach? What are you trying to accomplish? Tom, same question to you. This is critical because most conflicts are not actually about what people are doing. They are about why they believe they need to do it. Rachel's intent is probably quality control and accountability. Tom's intent is probably autonomy and trust. Once those intents are visible, the conflict transforms from a personality clash into a system design problem. They do not disagree about the goal. They disagree about the method. Step 5, next steps. You co-create a concrete agreement, not a vague commitment to do better. A specific, observable, time-bound agreement. Something like, Tom will deliver checkpoint updates by end of day Wednesday. Rachel will review them Thursday morning and share feedback using the SBI format. We will check in as a group next Friday to see if this is working. That is the entire framework. Situation, behavior, impact, intent, next steps. It takes 30 minutes, and it resolves conflicts that have been festering for weeks. Here is your Monday morning action. Think about the one interpersonal tension on your team that you have been avoiding. You know exactly which one. This week, schedule a 30-minute conversation with the people involved. Use SBI plus intent plus next steps. You will be surprised how quickly tension dissolves when people feel heard and when vague frustration is replaced with specific agreements. Now, conflict resolution is about repairing what is broken. But what if you could build a team that prevents most conflicts from escalating in the first place? A team that communicates proactively, holds each other accountable, and operates with such clarity that most problems get solved before they reach your desk? That is what a self-managing team looks like. and building one is the single highest leverage investment you will ever make as a leader. Let us build one in Chapter 8. Chapter 8: Building a Self-Managing Team. There is a question that separates the leaders who scale from the leaders who stall. It is not about strategy or talent acquisition or quarterly targets. It is this: what happens when you are not in the room? If your team's performance drops the moment you step away, you do not have a team. You have an audience. And audiences need a performer on stage at all times, or they lose interest. Google's People Operations team, the group responsible for how the company hires, develops, and retains talent, identified that the highest performing managers at Google share one counterintuitive trait. They are remarkably easy to replace, not because they lack value, but because they have built systems and team capabilities so robust that their physical presence is no longer the bottleneck. That insight came from Google's internal research initiative called Project Oxygen, which analyzed over 10,000 manager performance reviews and 300 manager variables to determine what makes a great manager. The number one behavior of Google's highest-rated managers was not technical expertise. It was being a good coach. The number two behavior was empowering the team and not micromanaging. Notice the pattern. The best managers build independence, not dependence. So how do you build a self-managing team? It comes down to three structural elements that most managers never install. Element 1 is clarity of ownership. Every person on your team should be able to answer three questions without hesitation. What am I responsible for? What decisions can I make without asking permission? How will my success be measured? If any of your team members cannot answer those three questions clearly, you have a clarity problem. And clarity problems always flow uphill. They are your responsibility, not theirs. This week, ask each of your direct reports those three questions in your next one-on-one. Do not prompt them, just ask. The gaps in their answers will show you exactly where your team's self-management breaks down. Element 2 is shared accountability rituals. A self-managing team holds itself accountable, not through surveillance, but through transparency. The simplest and most effective ritual I have seen is the weekly scorecard. Once a week, each team member shares three things with the group: what they committed to last week, what they actually delivered, and what they are committing to this week. No manager commentary required. The accountability comes from the team itself, from the social contract of making a public commitment to your peers. Research from the American Society of Training and Development found that people who make a specific commitment to someone else have a 95% probability of following through, compared to a 36% probability for those who simply set a private intention. 95 versus 36. That is the power of peer accountability, and it requires zero effort from you once the ritual is established. Element 3 is decision-making frameworks. The reason most teams depend on their manager for every decision is not that they lack judgment. It is that they lack permission. They do not know which decisions they are allowed to make. So install a simple framework. I recommend the traffic light model. Green decisions are ones your team can make without informing you at all. Yellow decisions require them to inform you before or after, but they still own the call. Red decisions require your direct involvement or approval. Define these categories once, communicate them clearly, and revisit them quarterly. Once all three elements are in place, something remarkable happens. Your calendar opens up, your stress decreases, and paradoxically, your influence increases because you are no longer managing tasks. You are shaping the system that manages itself. But here is the honest question that most leadership books never address. You have built the team. You have installed the systems. Your people are performing. Now what? How do you leverage that foundation to advance your own career? How do you make sure the people above you see your leadership, not just your team's output? That requires a skill most managers never develop. It is called leading up, and it is the subject of Chapter 9. Chapter 9: Leading Up, Managing Your Own Boss. 58% of professionals who leave their job cite their direct manager as the primary reason. You have probably heard that statistic before. It comes from Gallup, and it gets repeated in every leadership seminar on the planet. But here is the statistic that nobody talks about. According to a 2022 study from the Center for Creative Leadership, 64% of managers who are rated as high performers by their teams are rated as only average or below average by their own bosses. Let that sink in. You can be an exceptional leader to your team and still be invisible to the people who control your career trajectory. That is not a performance problem. That is a visibility problem. And solving it requires a skill that almost no leadership book teaches you: the skill of leading up. Leading up does not mean manipulation. It does not mean playing politics or being inauthentic. It means understanding that your boss is a human being with their own pressures, priorities, blind spots, and communication preferences, and adapting your approach accordingly. It means making it easy for your boss to trust you, rely on you, and advocate for you when promotion decisions are being made behind closed doors. Here are 3 high-leverage practices that the most career-savvy leaders use to lead up effectively. Practice 1 is communicate in their language. Every boss has a preferred communication style. Some want details, some want headlines, some want data, some want narrative. Your job is to figure out which one yours prefers and deliver information in that format. If your boss is a headlines person and you send them a 2-page email, they will not read it. If your boss is a details person and you give them a 1-sentence summary, they will not trust it. A 2021 Harvard Business Review analysis of 380 executive manager pairs found that alignment in communication style was the strongest predictor of the manager receiving a favorable performance review, stronger even than actual results delivered. Practice 2 is solve problems before they escalate. Your boss does not want to hear about problems. They want to hear about problems that come pre-packaged with solutions. The formula is simple. Here is the situation. Here is the impact. Here are 2 options I am considering, and here is the one I recommend. That structure communicates competence, initiative, and judgment in a single breath. It also saves your boss time, which is the most valuable gift you can give an overloaded executive. Practice 3 is make your wins visible without self-promoting. This is the tightrope most professionals struggle with. You need your boss to know what you are accomplishing, but you do not want to come across as self-serving. The solution is to frame your wins in terms of team outcomes and organizational impact. Instead of saying, "I closed the Henderson deal," say, "The team's new outreach strategy landed the Henderson account, which puts us 12% ahead of our quarterly target." You are still getting credit, but you are wrapping it in a narrative that demonstrates leadership, not ego. Your Monday morning action this week is straightforward. Schedule a 15-minute check-in with your boss. In that conversation, ask 2 questions. What are your biggest priorities this quarter? And how can my team and I best support those priorities? Those 2 questions communicate alignment, initiative, and a willingness to serve the bigger picture. That is how you get seen as leadership material. But being seen is only the beginning. The real question, the one that everything in this audiobook has been building toward, is who do you want to become? Not what title do you want? Not what salary do you want? Who do you want to be as a leader? That is the question we answer in the final chapter. Chapter 10, The Leader You Were Meant to Be. Close your eyes for a moment and picture yourself 90 days from now. You walk into your Monday morning meeting, and something is different. Your team is already discussing the week's priorities before you sit down. Someone flags a potential risk on a project, and 2 colleagues immediately brainstorm solutions. Another person shares a mistake they made last week, openly, without fear, and the team responds with curiosity instead of judgment. You sit down. You listen. You ask one question that reframes the entire conversation. And when the meeting ends, you realize something that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago. You did not assign a single task. You did not solve a single problem. And your team just had the most productive 30 minutes of their week. That is not a fantasy. That is what happens when you apply the frameworks in this audiobook consistently, day after day, decision after decision. Let us take stock of what you now have. You understand the accidental manager trap and why the skills that earned your promotion cannot sustain your leadership. You have made the mindset shift from answers to questions, from doing to developing. You know how to build psychological safety using the 3 pillars, and you have the 2x2 technique to surface honest input from your team. You have the delegation matrix and the 5-point handoff to free yourself from work that should not be on your plate. You have radical candor and the SBI framework for feedback that changes behavior without destroying trust. You have the SRR method and the 6-second rule for managing your emotions under pressure. You have the SBI plus intent plus next steps model for resolving conflicts that most managers avoid for weeks. You have the 3 structural elements of a self-managing team. And you have the practices for leading up and making your leadership visible to the people who shape your career. That is not just a collection of techniques. That is a complete leadership operating system. And it works because every piece connects to every other piece. Psychological safety enables honest feedback. Honest feedback enables effective delegation. Effective delegation enables self-managing teams. Self-managing teams free you to lead strategically. And strategic leadership earns you the visibility and credibility to advance. But I want to leave you with something more important than any framework. I want to leave you with a belief. You are not an accidental manager anymore. You did not stumble into this role. You chose at the moment you opened this audiobook and decided that you wanted to be better. That choice, that single decision to invest in yourself as a leader, puts you in a category that most professionals never reach. Not because they lack talent, because they lack intention. Leaders are not born. They are built, one decision at a time. And you have already made the most important one. Now go lead.